I chose to begin with this quote. In a moment of awakening, we see this truth. There's nothing wrong with us. We are already whole. It runs counter to the subtle belief that most of us carry, that there is always some kind of hole within us. For years, I found myself running relentlessly to hide that void, studying, working, trying, loving, and ultimately failing more. Yet instead of being filled, that chasm only widened. Perhaps you too have lived like this in a race that never reaches the finish line. The book I want to share with you is an invitation to stop. Radical acceptance doesn't teach us how to become perfect, nor does it offer a list of 10 steps to happiness. It brings us back to the place we dare to face the least, our own feelings of inadequacy, fear, and craving. The author wrote it not only with deep psychological knowledge, but also with the long nights spent drowning in dreams of powerlessness, with years of carrying the complex of I am not enough, and with the tears shed while sitting with her students and patients. This is not an easy book to swallow. It doesn't make you feel energized like after a motivational speech. It's like a mirror placed directly in front of you, forcing you to look at the parts you usually want to hide. But precisely because of this, it has the power to change you. Because when you dare to look at what you always feared most, the feeling of unworthiness, you discover a paradox. Wholeness has never left you. You just forgot. I still remember the story of the white tiger, locked its whole life in a narrow cage. It's still only circled in the old, small corner even after being released into a large, open space. I realized I was that tiger. So many opportunities out there, so much love right next to me. But I was imprisoned in the cage of judgment, of self-doubt, of fear. And that cage was built by myself and no one else. Reading this book, you will encounter many such moments. Everyday images suddenly become a mirror. A child lighting up just because they were truly listened to for the first time. A man admitting his anger hid his fear of losing his child. A woman realizing that beneath her addiction was only a deep desire to be embraced. These stories are not embellished, not sentimental, but so authentic that you cannot help but ask yourself, how many times have I hidden my pain beneath layers of masks? But what truly connected me with this book is not that it points out the wound, but the way it opens the path to healing through stopping, mindfulness, and compassion. Not compassion as a lofty virtue, but as a concrete action. Placing your hand on your chest, speaking a gentle word to yourself, and daring to admit, I am afraid, I am craving. From there, layer by layer, the armor falls away, revealing a heart that is still beating, still wanting to love and be loved. So I want to pose a question to you. A question that I myself have never stopped considering. If you wake up tomorrow and stop believing that something is wrong with you, how would you live differently? What would you dare to try that you have avoided for so long? How would you look at your family, friends, and lover if you knew that both you and they are already whole? And before we get into the book review, we strongly encourage you to purchase and read it so you can fully appreciate the content. Only when you finish this book will you truly understand the issues you are hearing me recount. And now, let's begin the book review together. One night, in a dream, I saw myself racing, sometimes climbing a slope, sometimes struggling against a strong current, and sometimes trying to pull a loved one out of impending disaster. My mind was frantic, but my body was heavy, as if trapped in a thick layer of honey. The harder I tried, the more powerless I became, leaving only a feeling of solitude, like one abandoned in a play without an exit. That dream is not just a trick of the subconscious. It is a mirror reflecting the state I lived in for so many years, a subtle delusion that makes us believe we are always flawed, always not good enough. As if there is an invisible voice repeating in our head, "You have never been worthy." It steals the ability to enjoy ordinary moments and turns every experience into a harsh test. This feeling has thousands of faces. Some rush into work, wearing themselves out to prove their worth. Some turn to drugs, alcohol, or short-lived affairs, just to temporarily forget the emptiness inside. Some cling tightly to a relationship, afraid that if they lose it, they will no longer have a reason to live. Others turn suffering into a weapon, creating enemies to vent their anger on. From an unpleasant boss to an entire community, or a nation. I once lived in a strict spiritual community, waking up at 3:30 a.m., taking cold showers, meditating, and chanting. Every morning, I felt the stillness as if embraced in a gentle ocean. But then, only a few hours later, the old shadow returned, the self-blame. The fears that I was not diligent enough, not pure enough, not good enough. Even when I thought I was on the path to liberation, I realized that the feeling of "I am not good enough" is not just an isolated matter for a few unhappy individuals. It is a collective illness, especially in a culture that honors competition and achievement. The creation story that many of us grow up with, the story of the Garden of Eden and the first sin, imprints a default setting on the mind, that we were marked from the beginning and must atone to return. From there, we rush into the spiral of proving our worth, controlling our bodies, emotions, work, and others, just to try to reclaim the lost ticket. In contrast, some cultures view life with a completely different perspective. In a meeting, when Western teachers explained the phenomenon of self-hatred, the Tibetan spiritual leader was confused. To him, the notion was so strange that it was almost pathological, as he believed that everyone inherently possesses a bright, awakened nature. That distance shows that sometimes culture itself becomes the cage, nurturing the delusion of scarcity and separation. I clearly remember the story of a little girl having a meal with her family. When her parents ordered for her, the girl clearly stated, "I want a hot dog, fries, and Coke." Her father immediately dismissed it. But the waitress turned and smiled, "So what do you want on your hot dog?" In that moment, the child's eyes lit up. She thought she was real. That tiny moment says it all. To be seen and acknowledged is the foundation of self-worth. So many people grow up without that experience. They are merely an extension of their parents' expectations, a product to show off, to mold, not an individual with a soul. They learn to live to please others, afraid to reveal the truth about themselves. In that atmosphere, the seed of unworthiness takes root early and grows over the years. When that pain is evident, we invent countless ways to escape. We cover it up with achievements, with surgically modified appearances, with packed schedules, with forced laughter. We rush into a loop, trying to hide it, only to reaffirm that we are truly flawed. Like the dreamer who, the more they struggled, the deeper they sank into the thick honey of helplessness. I once heard a friend describe the feeling that something is wrong with them as an invisible poison gas they breathe every day, unseen, but gradually seeping in, making us lethargic and distant from ourselves. The sad thing is, many people only touch that truth at the end of their lives. Some on their deathbed exclaim, "My whole life I thought there was something wrong with me," and then close their eyes in regret. We don't have to wait until the final moment to wake up, but we must also admit that waking up from this delusion is not a one-day affair. It requires the courage to directly face the fear, along with the disciplining of the heart and mind. During a meditation session, I told the story of the little girl in the restaurant. As we left the session, my mother sat beside me in the car, her voice shaky with emotion. That little girl was her in her youth. My mother recounted that she grew up as a shadow in her parents' eyes, not seen as a real person. All her value lay only in whether she made them proud. Her joy and sorrow had no space to exist. From a young age, she learned that she was only loved when she pleased others. That story is not uncommon. Many people carry in their hearts memories of parents who were not fully present, or too busy to see us, or imposed on us to become something they dreamed of. Sometimes they are just children who grew up in lack and passed that burden from one generation to the next. The refrain, "You are not enough," thus echoes. I remember a student in a meditation class recounting his childhood. Back then, the 7-year-old boy ran into the kitchen, crying because his older brother had teased him, hoping for a comforting embrace. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, but instead of hugging him, she turned around, hands on her hips, her eyes full of irritation. "Don't be weak." That nonverbal answer, the look, the attitude etched a message into his mind. Needing someone else is shameful. The need for closeness became a stain in his heart. We grow up in a culture that praises self-reliance, competition, and strength. Natural emotions like fear, anger, and craving are seen as signs of weakness. In violent family environments, the message is even more brutal. You are worthless, you are just a burden. Even without violence, many children still subtly learn that they are only valuable if they are good, if they are smart, if they stand out above others. To survive in that atmosphere, we invent all sorts of strategies to hide the fragile core. Some embark on a series of self-improvement projects, exercising, dieting, upgrading their appearance, enrolling in extra courses, meditating endlessly. Not all of these things are bad, but the underlying motive is the fear of being not enough. Thus, they never bring true ease. Some choose the safe route. They avoid challenges, steer clear of situations where failure is likely. Like the boy I once advised to try singing, playing music, or tennis. But he refused because he wanted to be good right from the start. In his head echoed the funny yet poignant saying, "Trying is the first step toward failure." Some fill every moment with work. Being busy in a society that worships productivity, we are easily praised for always working hard. But in fact, that is also a form of avoidance, because when we stop, the feeling of emptiness rushes in. The fear of "I am worthless" is more apparent than ever. Still others choose to withdraw from the present, repeatedly rehearsing mental scenarios, things to do, old mistakes, upcoming dangers like a playful telegram. Start worrying. Details to follow. That vague worry keeps us constantly alert, as if we stop worrying, life will crush us. And there is one familiar strategy: turning oneself into an inner judge. An internal voice constantly scores and points out every shortcoming. It is no different from a replica of the parent's judging voice from years ago. Some even admit, "I inherited my father's gait, voice, habits, and also the contempt my mother had for him." Self-judgment becomes the way we think we can control or restrain the bad within us. If we don't blame ourselves, we easily project outward, turning others into enemies who help us feel less inadequate. At least we get to feel right. But that separation is just another loop of fear. All these strategies, though different, share one common consequence. They reinforce the tightening grip of the unworthiness complex. The more we try to avoid it, the more we affirm to ourselves that something is indeed wrong with us. When the anxiety about our inadequacy becomes unbearable, we often seek a place to vent it. Sometimes that is ourselves, but sometimes it is others, a father, a boss, a political group, even an entire nation. We erect an image of the enemy, attaching all imperfections and cruelty to them. This provides a temporary feeling that we are stronger, we are more righteous, we are in control of the situation. But in truth, it is just another mask for the fragile fear within us. There are times when the external threat is real. People can hurt each other. We can inflict harm on ourselves. But if we react with hatred, we only deepen the rift and sow more fear. Only when we face that fragility with a wise heart do we have a chance to escape the tightening grip. The deeper origin of this suffering lies, not in individual incidents, but in the fundamental perception of a separate self. More than 2,000 years ago, under the Bodhi tree, a man sat all night looking directly into his suffering and realized the root of all suffering lies in the illusion of a separate self. When our mind clings to the notion of a separate self, it opens up an endless chain of craving and rejection. We forget the primordial foundation, a stream of awareness and love that is already present. What we call I is actually just a collection of memories, emotions, and habits. We stick them together into a story and believe it is a fixed self. Therefore, just a moment of sadness or a criticism is enough to make us feel that this entire self is flawed. And if we have already sunk into the feeling of I am not okay, it easily turns into I am inherently flawed, sometimes without a clear catalyst. I still find a vague anxiety within me that I am not enough. It might be a subtle whisper, pushing me to chase work, achievement, or just a chilling feeling of loneliness. Separation has become an instinct tied to survival. Like the early single-celled organisms that built a membrane between themselves and the outside world. But when fear takes over, we forget that beneath that membrane, there is still an ocean connecting everything. Desires and fears are not enemies. They are the energy that helps us survive. But when we confuse them with our very essence, we only see ourselves as small and lacking. We forget that we also possess the capacity for curiosity, humor, and kindness. We forget the breath that sustains us every minute, the love that connects us to others, and the fragility and beauty of this life. More importantly, we forget the light of inherent awareness that is our deepest nature. Some people realize after many years that they have wasted their whole lives enduring self-hatred. But as soon as they see the prison they are in, they also simultaneously see the open door. A meditation master once said, "Freedom is living without worry about imperfection." That doesn't mean we become perfect, but that we accept imperfection as an essential part of existence. Sickness, old age, moments of ignorance, all are a natural flow. When we are no longer at war with imperfection, we stop wasting our lives trying to be otherwise. A writer once described Western culture as a tree uprooted, its branches and leaves suspended in the air. He observed, "We are slowly dying from a lack of nourishment from the inner source," and I find that so true. We only revive when we reconnect with our inherent goodness, with the natural connection to each other and to every moment. The delusion of lack seems to be human destiny. But the potential for awakening also lies right within that same nature. We escape the prison when we stop waging war against ourselves and begin to practice living with a heart that is both clear-sighted and compassionate. That is the open door back to the old garden, which still exists within us with wholeness, clarity, and love that was never lost in the past. At the Capitol Zoo, there was a white tiger named Mohini. For many years, confined to a cramped cage only a few square meters wide, it walked day after day on the familiar, cold cement floor. The compassionate caretakers finally built it a natural environment, a few acres of land, with grass, trees, a pond, and hills to climb, a paradise compared to the old iron cage. But when released, Mohini did not explore the vast field. It huddled in a corner and still paced back and forth over an area of about 12 square meters, so much so that the spot became barren. For the rest of its life, it never stepped out of the mental framework imprinted by its cage. The story of Mohini is not just the tragedy of a wild animal. It is an allegory of ourselves. The prison door is open, but the habit of self-restriction and self-judgment keeps us circling in the old cage. We hear the call of freedom, unconditional love, living fully, breathing with the beauty around us. But then we slip back into the familiar corner of the voices. You are not enough. You must do more. You must be different. And so, even though the world is wide open, we remain rooted in a narrow plot of land limited by ourselves. The most frightening thing is not the lack of freedom, but having freedom within reach and yet wasting one's life in the rut. Unlike Mohini, we can learn to recognize the cage in our minds and know that it is not destiny. The way out begins with a simple yet often neglected action: acceptance. Not the resigned kind of acceptance, but looking directly at the present moment body, feelings, thoughts, without judging or dismissing, accepting both joy and sorrow, both fragility and craving. I call that radical acceptance. This sounds paradoxical. Isn't the very feeling of inadequacy what causes us suffering? Why accept it? Yet, it is the attitude of, I cannot have this, I must change it, that feeds the caged. When we allow ourselves to feel fully, a door opens. Acceptance has two wings, like the wings of a bird that help us fly out of the inner prison. One wing is clear seeing, the ability to see exactly what is happening in the body and mind. We see the fear tightening our chest, the thoughts running wild, the desire to escape and simply register. It is present. No embellishment, no running after it. The other wing is tenderness, the ability to cherish what we have just seen with a soft heart. We let the fear be present without dismissing it, embracing the craving like a mother embracing her child. Only with the presence of compassion does acceptance become whole, that it is not surrender. The two wings are inseparable. If there is only clear seeing but no tenderness, we easily turn practice into a harsh scrutiny, hating ourselves more the more we examine. If there is only tenderness but no clear seeing, we easily fall into self-pity, circling in old stories. When both wings open together, we take flight, leaving the rut of self-hatred. Imagine being rejected by a loved one. By inertia, we cycle between anger, sadness, and self-blame. But if we introduce those two wings, we stop to clearly see the pang in our chest, the stream of thoughts like, I am unlovable, and simultaneously embrace it with tenderness. In that very moment, the spiral stops. We still hurt, but we are no longer submerged by it. We begin to have the space to choose instead of being swept away. Radical acceptance applies not only to individual moments, but also to the larger patterns of our lives. We can look at how we often get angry, how we hurt our children, then clearly see the motive, feel the consequence, and from within that tenderness hear the silent reminder, we truly want to love, not to harm. That is how acceptance gradually adjusts behavior, not through coercion, but through alignment with the heart. And most importantly, radical acceptance is not something alien. It is inherent within us as the clear, bright nature that was never lost. When we remember that, we are like the ocean embracing the waves. No matter how turbulent the waves, the ocean remains vast and calm. Sometimes what we need most is not more effort, but knowing how to stop. Just like the evening the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree. He did not try to eliminate the phantom temptations or fears, but simply sat still, open-hearted to everything. I call that moment a sacred pause, a small bridge that takes us out of the inertia of reaction and back to the life that is unfolding. We are often too quick. When discomfort arises, we react immediately, anger, escape, searching for something to soothe. The sacred pause invites us to do the opposite, to stand still for a moment, recognize the breath, the feeling on the skin, the heartbeat. Not to make it disappear, but to be present with it. Just a few such moments are enough to open up space, where we are no longer pulled away. A student once told me that whenever he feels anxious, he tends to check his phone, scroll through the news, looking for something to fill the void. I said, next time, before opening your phone, pause for 3 breaths and ask yourself, what is happening inside me in this moment? He tried it, and after just a few weeks, he realized that often he didn't need to rush into action. Just allowing the feeling to be there, it calmed down on its own. The pause opens the door to another step, becoming friends with yourself. This sounds simple, but for many, it is the hardest. We are used to treating ourselves like a lazy person who needs to be pushed, a bad child who needs to be punished, or a weakling who needs to be scorned. Yet we do not realize that we would never behave like that towards someone we love. Becoming friends with yourself means completely changing the approach. Not I must be better to be worthy of love, but I love myself even when I am clumsy. even when I stumble. When an emotion arises, anger, envy, craving, we no longer call it an enemy, but listen to it as we would listen to a friend trying to convey a message. I once knew a woman stuck in a loop of self-criticism. Every time she made a small mistake, she repeated the familiar phrase, "I am so stupid." I advised her to try replacing that phrase with, "Hello, little friend. I see your worry." Gradually, she felt gentler, no longer weighed down by the stupid phrase. That small change is like opening a window, just a crack to let in light and fresh air. When we learn to look at ourselves through the eyes of a friend, there is nothing left to hide. The parts we thought were ugly turn out to be just hidden corners, waiting to be touched with kindness. This does not mean we give up, but on the contrary, from the foundation of acceptance, we gain the strength to change. Like a tree that only grows when its roots are embedded in the soil. A person only develops when placed in the atmosphere of love. The sacred pause and unconditional friendship with oneself are not techniques to achieve spiritual success, but a way of being. They remind us that we do not need to race for the right to exist. Just being present with everything that is happening is enough. We often live like people who are lost, our minds wandering in plans, worries, and memories, while the body is neglected like an empty shell. Yet the body itself is the most direct door to return to life. When I began guiding meditation, the first thing I invited students to do was not to focus on some lofty concept, but to feel their feet touching the ground. The rising and falling of the abdomen with the breath, the breeze sweeping across the skin. Just that, and we are present. But returning to the body is not just a technique. It is a reconciliation after years of separation. Many people carry their body within them like a foreign land. Some despise the body because they think it is not beautiful enough. Some see it only as a tool to achieve goals. Others view it as the burden of illness. When we turn our backs on the body, we also turn our backs on life itself. Once a student of mine cried during a meditation session. She confessed that for many years she lived as if only the part from the neck up was human. The body from the neck down was just a machine forced to diet and exercise to please others. When invited to sit still and place her hand on her heart, she felt like she was coming home to herself for the first time. Tears fell as she realized how many years she had neglected her own home. Returning to the body means allowing all sensations a place to reside, the tension in the shoulders, the pang in the stomach, the racing heartbeat of fear. These are all messages. Instead of hating or trying to push them away, we can listen to what they are saying. Sometimes just admitting, this is tension, this is fear, is enough to release half the weight. From this earthly ground, we step into another dimension. Craving, in many spiritual traditions, is seen as the source of suffering, and it is true that when we cling to it, it binds us. But if we only suppress or drive it away, we miss an opening. Remember the times we truly craved something: a love, safety, a feeling of belonging. Beneath the surface of every specific craving is a common current, the desire for connection, for unity. So craving is not the enemy, but a map leading us back to the source. A man once told me he rushed into consecutive fleeting relationships. He thought he was a sex addict, but when he sat down and felt it more deeply, he burst into tears. Actually, I just wanted to be held and feel important to someone. Beneath this layer of sensual craving is a very human need, to be loved and to be acknowledged. When he touched that core, the endless cycle of searching began to loosen. Radical acceptance of craving means daring to look directly at it, not identifying with it, but also not driving it away. We admit, yes, I am craving, and then go deeper. What lies beneath? Often, we will find a universal need tied to the most vital quality within us, a longing for connection with life. I remember once in meditation, I felt an unnameable thirst surge within. If I had followed the path of least resistance, I would have sought something to fill it. Work, affection, food. But in the stillness, I allowed it to be present, and gradually it transformed into a soft feeling like a river. It was a yearning for the source, a desire to merge into something larger than myself. And so, the body is not just a shell, and craving is not just a chain. When we return to them with awareness and tenderness, they become guides. A guide that is always honest, always reminding us that we belong, we are connected. We have never been separate from the great ocean of life. There's a form of impulse that is often misunderstood. It appears in many layers of clothing: thirst for love, hunger for power, attraction to the body, or the desire for recognition. At first glance, everyone thinks it is a trap, something to be suppressed, to be overcome. But if we dare to stop and look closely, underneath every specific desire, there's a common undercurrent: the yearning to be connected, to dissolve into something greater than oneself. When I was young, I witnessed many friends being torn apart by desires they considered evil. One was passionately involved in short-lived affairs, cursing himself after each end. Another was addicted to work, collapsing from exhaustion, but unable to stop. Talking to them, I realized what they sought was not necessarily temporary pleasure, but a silent acknowledgement that they exist, that they are important to someone, that they belong somewhere. We often reject desire because it makes us feel vulnerable. When we crave something, we simultaneously expose the empty space in our heart. And for fear of being scorned, of disappointment, we label desire as evil. We think that suppressing it is the path to maturity, but it is precisely then that we overlook an opportunity, the opportunity to realize that all cravings are a mirror reflecting the profound source of life. I once sat in meditation and felt an unnameable thirst surge within. It was not food, nor sex, nor any specific goal. It was like a song echoing from afar, inviting me to return to the source. At first, I felt uneasy because the mind wanted to attach it to a tangible object. But when I allowed it to be present, I realized it was the call of connection, the craving to unite with the whole. And surprisingly, that thirst was no longer a burden but became a warm current guiding me back to life. Looking back, I see a paradox. The very desires that cause us suffering are also the gateway for us to touch freedom. If we chase them blindly, we are bound. But if we dare to face them, listen, and trace them to the deeper layer, we see that our greatest longing is not for possession, but for belonging. Remember the time you truly loved someone. On the surface, it might be the craving for physical intimacy, but deeper down is the wish to merge, to be seen and fully acknowledged. Or when you are passionate about an idea, a job, not only for the reward, but because in it you feel alive, connected to something vast. That is the essence of desire, an invitation to return to wholeness. This does not mean we indulge every desire. If we rush to act, desire easily turns into a chain of addictions. But if we avoid it, deny it, we are also haunted by it. The path lies in allowing the desire to appear, observing it, and then asking the question, beneath this surface, what am I truly seeking? A man once shared with me that for many years he sought intimacy in fleeting relationships. He called himself a sex addict. But in the moment of sitting still, he burst into tears. All I wanted was to be held and to know that I mattered to someone. Precisely by daring to look directly at the craving, he discovered the fundamental need that had been hidden for so long. And from then on, the endless search loop began to dissolve. Desire is a harsh but honest teacher. It points out where we feel inadequate. But if we are brave enough to listen, it also tells us what is essential. Life wants to be connected. The heart wants to be loved. The soul wants to return. The paradox is that the path to liberation is not to run away from desire, but to step into the midst of it. Listen to it to the very end. Not to satisfy every hunger, but to recognize the call beneath. Then, desire is no longer a chain but becomes a compass. Just as desire shows us where we long to be connected, then fear exposes where we feel most fragile. Fear is like a cold wind gusting, making us withdraw and erect barriers. Sometimes we try to deny it, attaching other names to it: anger, indifference, control. But if we look straight, we know that the root is still fear. Fear of loss, fear of being hurt, fear of not being strong enough to face the truth. I remember sitting with a young woman with a terminal illness, her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands twisted together. She said she was afraid of dying, but more afraid of the emptiness before death. Afraid no one would remember her, afraid her life was meaningless. If we only tried to reassure her, all words would be hollow. I invited her to simply place her hand on her heart and whisper, "I am afraid." In a few seconds, tears welled up, and strangely, her face softened. Not because the fear disappeared, but because for the first time she allowed it to exist and be named. Fear often makes us think that closing the heart is the safe way. But in fact, that is the way we suffocate. The more we close off, the more isolated we become. Only when we dare to open up, even in trembling, do we feel alive. There is a paradoxical truth. Precisely when we allow fear to be present, it loses its power. I once went through intense anxiety myself. At times it was so strong I thought I would faint. My body was tense, my mind spinning with catastrophic scenarios. By inertia, I wanted to resist, to cast it out. But in a rare moment of clarity, I remembered what I always taught others: stop, breathe, and say, "Hello, fear." Doing so, I realized I wasn't completely swept away. A part of me was still vast enough to embrace the storm. From then on, instead of fighting it, I walked with it. Someone asked, "Will opening up to fear turn us into weaklings?" But in reality, only those who dare to look straight are truly brave. Weakness is when we are controlled by fear without knowing it. Strength is when we dare to let it be present, even let it soften us. In meditation courses, I often invite students to try sitting with a small fear, like the fear of rejection, the fear of failure. When they close their eyes and pay attention to their breath, many feel their heart pound, their hands sweat. But when they place their hand on their chest and whisper, "It's okay, I am here with this fear," their face relaxes. They discover they are not the fear. They are the one embracing it. Fear, like craving, is not the enemy. It is part of life. Fear itself shows that we know how to love, how to value, how to desire. We are afraid of losing because we have loved. We are afraid of failing because we have hoped. If we only see fear as darkness, we will forever try to chase it away. But if we recognize the seed of love within it, we will know how to open our heart. A man once confessed that he often got angry at his son for no reason. But sitting still, he saw that the anger actually covered a fear. Fear his son would repeat his failures. Fear he couldn't protect his son. When he saw that, he burst into tears, and from that day on, instead of yelling, he began to learn how to say, "I worry about you so much." The closeness was restored, not because he eliminated the fear, but because he dared to acknowledge it. Opening the heart in fear does not make life less dangerous, but it transforms the experience into authenticity. We are no longer hiding, no longer living a half-life. And from here, a new possibility opens, learning to love oneself like a trembling child who needs a hug. There is a moment I cannot forget. A student sitting before me, her body hunched, her eyes lost. She recounted that every time she made a small mistake, the voice in her head immediately resonated, "You are useless." I told her to try placing her hand on her heart and whispering, "I am hurting, and I am here with this pain." In just a few seconds, her shoulders dropped, her face softened. That was the first time she felt the difference between self-scolding and self-embracing. We often wait for others to bring that hug. But life doesn't always give us exactly what we need. If we only depend on the outside, we will forever drift. There is another possibility. We ourselves can become the shoulder for ourselves, become the comforter we have been searching for. It seems paradoxical, but the truth is, we can simultaneously play the role of the one who hugs and the one who is hugged. The two parts are not in opposition, but complementary. That is how compassion blossoms from the very fragility we once denied. Some people say, "I don't know how to love myself, I only hate." I usually ask back, when a friend is suffering, what do you do? They answer, I comfort them, I listen. And I say, try doing that for yourself. The first steps are always clumsy, but just by trying, the seed is sown. I once went through a period of depression. Waking up, I felt like a stone was pressing on my chest. I hated that feeling, tried to force myself to get up, to be busy, to forget. But the more I denied it, the heavier the stone became. One morning, I gave up, placed my hand on my chest, and whispered, I know you are here, sadness. Tears flowed, but strangely, the stone felt lighter. I realized that the resistance itself was what made it press down. But when I embraced it, it became a part of me, and I was no longer alone. Compassion for oneself is not indulgence, nor is it justifying mistakes. It is looking directly at the truth. We are fragile, we are vulnerable. And because of this, we need gentleness, not a whip. Only when our heart softens toward ourselves can we open up to others. Imagine a child lost from its mother in a crowd. It screams, its eyes panicked. Then a woman approaches, kneels down, and hugs it. Immediately, the panic subsides because there is a feeling of safety. There is a child like that inside us, lost among the crowd of thoughts and judgments. Every time we place our hand on our heart, slow our breath, and say a gentle word, we are that woman. Embracing the inner child, the transformation happens on a very small scale. A person who is addicted to self-judgment tried saying to himself only a few times a day, I am only human. After a few months, his face was less tense, and his relationships became lighter. There is no instant miracle, only the patience of repeating until compassion becomes the new habit. I believe that inside every person, there's an endless source of compassion, just waiting to be opened. When we taste the act of self-embracing, we realize that this embrace has never been lacking. We just forgot how to reach out. One day, during a retreat, I invited everyone to imagine a circle around their heart. Initially, it was only large enough to contain themselves. Then I told them to expand it to include family and friends. After that, even strangers they had briefly encountered. Then even the people who made them angry or even hurt them. And finally, the circle expanded to encompass all beings. When the exercise ended, the room fell silent. Many faces were wet with tears. Not because they had resolved all conflicts, but because for the first time they felt the vastness within their own hearts. Love often begins with personal need, the desire to be comforted, the desire to be loved. But once the heart has learned to embrace itself, it doesn't stop there. Like the ripples that spread when we throw a pebble into the water, compassion naturally expands without command. I remember visiting a patient who was dying. He held my hand and whispered, my whole life I only thought about work, about money. Now I wish I had spent more time loving. That statement was like a mirror reflecting the truth. At the end of life, what we regret is not having loved too much, but having loved too little. Expanding the circle of compassion does not mean embracing the whole world in one day. It starts with small steps, listening to a suffering friend, smiling at a stranger, forgiving someone who once hurt us. Each small act is a ray of light, and they converge to form the sky. Someone asked me, how can one love even those who are cruel? I do not suggest we condone harmful actions, but I believe that even within the cruel person resides a child who was once hurt, who once craved love and did not receive it. When we see that part, we no longer see only an enemy, but a lost human being. This understanding does not erase responsibility. but it opens the possibility of acting without being driven by hatred. The Bodhisattva spirit is exactly that. Not waiting to be perfect before helping others. Not waiting for the world to be safe before opening the heart. Even in fragility, we can still give. A bodhisattva is not a superhuman image, but is anyone who dares to let their heart extend beyond themselves. I once witnessed a miraculous moment in a poor community. A 10-year-old boy gave his small portion of rice to his neighbor's younger sibling because he saw the child was hungrier. That gesture is simple, but embodies the entire bodhisattva spirit. It is placing the happiness of others on equal footing, even above oneself. Expanding compassion is also a way to heal social fractures. When we see the pain of others as our own pain, we cannot continue to be indifferent. From there, small actions protecting the environment, helping the vulnerable, speaking kindly are no longer obligations but become spontaneous. A Zen master once said, "A bird does not ask, 'Should I spread my wings?' When it flies, it simply spreads them because that is its nature." Compassion is the same. When we reconnect with our bright nature, love is no longer a command but a natural respiration. There are moments in life when we look back and see ourselves filled with mistakes, words that hurt loved ones, wrong decisions, times we turned away when we should have stepped forward. In those memories, many people feel so ashamed they want to erase the past. But the more we try to deny it, the tighter the darkness clings. Only when we touch the truth that beneath everything we still carry a fundamental brightness. Does that self-critical loop loosen? I call that truth our original goodness. It is not a kind of morality bestowed by society, nor is it something that must be achieved through effort. It is like the vast sky, which can be obscured by clouds but never lost. Even if we make mistakes, that sky remains. We wait for the clouds to clear. A woman once told me she could not forgive herself for abandoning her child during her addiction. Many years after recovering, she still lived in remorse. In a practice session, I invited her to visualize the child from years ago and whisper, "Even though I made mistakes, my nature still embodies the capacity to love." She burst into tears, not because the mistake disappeared, but because for the first time she felt that something within her was still clear, never ruined. From that place, the possibility of forgiveness began to open. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as overlooking or accepting wrong behavior. In fact, forgiveness is seeing the inherent bright nature in oneself and others, even when behavior has been flawed. Forgiveness does not erase responsibility, but allows the heart to stop carrying the burden of hatred. Remember a man who lost his child in an act of violence, in such pain that he once swore he would hate the perpetrator for the rest of his life. But after many years of meditation practice, he shared, "If I keep holding on to hatred, I will also slowly die. I want to keep the love for my child, not the hatred for his killer." He did not deny the loss, but by recognizing the original goodness, he found the door to forgiveness. Compassion and forgiveness are intertwined. If we cannot see the inherent brightness, we will forever view ourselves and others through the lens of our mistakes. But when we believe that beneath the dust, the gem remains, we can gently wipe it clean without hating the stone. There are times when forgiving oneself is the hardest thing. We are accustomed to self-judgment, seeing ourselves as the sinner. But if we cannot forgive ourselves, we will find it difficult to open up to anyone else. Forgiving oneself does not mean making excuses, but admitting, "I was wrong, and I still carry within me a nature that wants to love, to be good." It is from that place that true change begins. The heart only truly opens when it knows that goodness is not something that needs proof. When we realize we are already bright, every effort no longer stems from complexes, but from the natural desire to live fully. That is the turning point. From striving to become worthy, we begin to live as someone who is innately enough. We often think that loving means finding someone to fill the void within us. But in reality, if we cannot sit still with our own vulnerability, we will bring it into the relationship as a burden. We demand that the other person compensate and prove our worth, and when they fail to deliver, we feel even more worthless. When we learn to pause and look directly at our cravings and fears, we cease projecting them onto others. We can enter a relationship not to be rescued, but to share. Love, then, is no longer a negotiation, but a shared presence in both joy and vulnerability. I once met a couple who constantly argued over small things, forgetting to take out the trash, being late, not calling. On the surface were trivial conflicts, but when they sat together in a listening exercise, the core issue was revealed. The wife admitted, "Every time you forget, I feel unimportant." The husband confided through tears, "Actually, I'm afraid I'm not good enough, which is why you will leave." Only when they dared to voice their fragility did the wall dissolve. From then on, they began to learn to listen, not to debate, but to understand. Profound power resides in attentive listening. When we place all our attention on the words, the eyes and the silences, we send the other person a message. I see you. And often to be seen is what the other person truly yearns for. However, listening does not only happen in major conversations. It is also present in every small gesture. A patient look when a loved one struggles, a gentle touch when they grieve, a non-judgmental silence when they falter, all are ways to practice radical acceptance in daily life. Someone asked, "But what if the relationship is too damaged?" I believe that love cannot always keep a relationship intact. Sometimes radical acceptance means accepting the truth that the connection between us and the other person must end. But even then, we can let go without resentment, because we understand that each person is simply following their own path. Practicing radical acceptance in love is also learning to see the beauty within imperfection. The other person will have moments of selfishness, weakness, and mistakes, just as we do. Instead of seeing this as proof that they are undeserving, we can view it as an opportunity for mutual growth. Mature love does not eliminate suffering, but is expansive enough to embrace its entirety. I once witnessed an elderly couple sitting side by side in the hospital. The old woman's hands trembled as she fed the old man porridge, and the old man, though weak, smiled, his eyes shining. In that moment, there was no right or wrong, no question of who was compensating for whom, only complete presence. This was two fragile human beings embracing each other in life's finality. When we stop trying to turn others into a solution for our own lack, we are truly free to love. And love, in turn, is not something we hold on to, but a space where both are free to be themselves, without pretense, without hiding. There is a boundary we long thought was real, the notion of a fixed self. We believe we are our stories, our memories, our fears, and our cravings. We build walls around ourselves. I am this, I am not that. Yet, as we begin to delve into radical acceptance, we realize that everything we cling to is fundamentally changing, fundamentally dissolving. And in the moment of seeing through it all, we see a vast, silent, and bright space remaining. That is the true nature. I once sat by a spring river, listening to the ceaseless flow of water, and suddenly the thought came that I was just a small wave in an endless current. When I stopped clinging to my self-image, stopped analyzing whether I was good or bad, I felt myself dissolve into that river. It was no longer I observing, but simply life knowing itself. The lightness was hard to describe. There was no need left to prove anything, nothing left to hide, only freedom. This realization is not some far-fetched mystical concept. It can come in very mundane moments. When we sit still listening to birds sing, when we laugh with friends, when we see a burst of anger arise and then dissolve, whenever we clearly see the change of all phenomena. It is then that we can touch the unchanging ground of awareness that encompasses everything. And from that realization, a new tenderness spreads. If I am no longer limited to the narrow self, then your pain is also my pain. Your joy is also my joy. Compassion, consequently, is no longer an effort, but a natural reflex. Much like the ocean that chooses not which waves to embrace, it embraces them all. However, to make this realization a lived reality, we need specific practices because the mind easily forgets, easily reverts to old ways. That is why I dedicate the final part to sharing exercises that can be brought into daily life. Begin by recognizing the delusion of unworthiness. Whenever the judgmental voice rings out, stop and name it. This is the old voice. Recognition alone is sufficient to avoid being swept away by it. The next practice is vipassana. Observe the body and mind. Feel sensations with calm attention, not trying to fix them, but simply observing like someone sitting on the riverbank watching the river flow. The sacred pause is also a powerful tool. Just a few present breaths are enough to break the cycle of reaction. From this space, we gain the power to choose a different action. Sometimes the simple practice is whispering the word yes to this moment. Yes to the fear, to the pain, to the joy. The word yes is not surrender, but acceptance that allows the heart to open. Do not forget to return to the body, placing a hand on the abdomen as you breathe. Feel the earth supporting your feet. The body is the gateway for return. When pain arises, instead of resisting, try whispering, "It's okay." This consent transforms pain into a teacher, teaching us about fragility and patience. Craving is the same. Instead of rushing to fill it, sit with it and ask, what am I truly craving? The answer often lies not in external objects, but in the deep need for connection. Try greeting fear like a guest. Invite it to sit down for tea, and realize that while it is here, you are still larger than it. Practice Tonglen. Breathing in your own pain, the pain of others. Breathing out love. This exercise awakens compassion, dissolving the feeling of separation. Nurture the heart of forgiveness by recalling moments when someone forgave you or you forgave someone else. Feel the lightness and allow it to spread. Unconditional love can begin with a simple wish. May you be peaceful. Try sending this wish to yourself, your loved ones, and even those who are difficult. Mindful communication is an equally important practice. Each time you speak, be aware of what seed your words carry, connection or division. And finally, this simple question: who am I? Not to find an intellectual answer, but to remind us to return to the vastness that already exists. Acceptance, after all, is not a philosophy to read and set aside. It is a way of living moment by moment. Living as if you are already enough, as if this world is already enough. In every breath, every glance, every touch, we can practice it to remind ourselves that our essence is freedom, brightness, and fullness of love. The ultimate destination of this journey is neither a formula to end suffering, nor a promise that your life will be perpetually peaceful. What I want to convey is simply this: you do not have to become someone else to be permitted to live, to love, and to be peaceful right now. With all your cracks and imperfections, you are enough. Ask yourself, how many years have you lived with the feeling that you had to prove something? How many times have you told yourself, only when I am more successful, thinner, smarter, more recognized, will I have value? If you look back, do you realize how much energy was wasted fighting a shadow? The shadow of not being enough that you created yourself. The paradox is that the more we strive for perfection, the further away we move from life. The fears and cravings we try to hide are precisely the gateways for us to touch the truth. The truth that inside every human being there is a gentle, never drying stream. We only need to stop resisting and it will flow out. The question I want to send to you is this: if tomorrow you wake up and stop believing you are not enough, how will you live differently? What will you say to yourself, to the person you love? What will you dare to try that you have avoided for so long out of fear? The biggest lesson I drew while writing these pages is that acceptance does not make pain disappear. but it transforms our way of being with pain. It does not turn the world into paradise, but it gives us new eyes to see that even in suffering, there is gentleness. Even in fragility, there is strength. Even in the cracks, there is light. And if you have ever rejected yourself, please try once to place your hand on your chest and whisper to yourself, "I am here, and I accept myself." That whisper seems small, but it can be the seed that starts an entire garden. I know it is easy to say and hard to practice. You will forget, you will stumble, you will have days when you find yourself caught in the old cage again. But it's okay. Acceptance does not demand that you remember always, nor does it force you to be perfect and accepting. It only invites you, whenever you realize you are lost, to return to a breath, a touch, a gentleness. And that is already enough. Before closing, I want to invite you to keep one question in your heart. How will you live if you believe that your deepest nature is goodness, brightness, and fullness? Let that question accompany you, not to find an immediate answer, but to open up new ways of living, new relationships, and perhaps a completely different view of life itself. Thank you for walking with me to the end of this path. The journey is not over because life will continue to test you and your heart will have to learn to open many more times. But I believe once you have tasted the freedom of complete acceptance, you will never forget that flavor. See you in the next book.